It's Margarita from People Do Want to Know podcast. This week is another 2-for-1, meaning 2 episodes in 1 week, and I'm sharing stories of remarkable Jewish women who are doing amazing work to help Israel. I'll be posting a lot of information about their businesses on Instagram, so please check us out and give us a follow at People Do Want to Know. Today's episode is with our first guest-nominated remarkable Jew, Harper Spero. Harper was nominated by Margot Tweeto a few weeks ago. Harper Spero is a business coach, community builder, and storyteller. In 2018, she founded Made Visible, driven by her personal journey with a rare primary immunodeficiency, hyper IgE syndrome. Made Visible began as a podcast, and now with over 125 episodes, Harper has amplified the voices of countless individuals living with invisible illnesses. However, Harper's recent focus involves collaborating with companies to foster inclusivity and connection through her experiential keynote session on storytelling and the Made Visible Storytellers Workshop. Notable clients of this workshop include UBS, Sony Music Group, Diageo, Mellon Investments, and Public Consulting Group. Additionally, Harper offers her expertise as a business coach, supporting solopreneurs, freelancers, and small business owners in brainstorming, launching, and building their ventures. In complete honesty, I wasn't very familiar with this concept of invisible illness and how it could impact people in the workplace. I really enjoyed this conversation with Harper to learn more. In this episode, I also talked to Harper about the work that she's been doing to help Israel. Harper single-handedly raised $40,000 for Israel. She'll talk about exactly how she did it and what she learned along the way. I wanted to share this story with you because it really goes to show any of us have the ability and the skills to do something big, just if we put our mind to it. Harper doesn't work for a Jewish nonprofit. She's not a fundraiser. But through her own initiative and work ethic, she was able to raise a really significant amount. I've always been very committed to bringing diverse guests on the podcast. I think that's very important. And I'm so glad I had a chance to speak with Harper because she adds a completely unique dimension to our encyclopedia of remarkable Jewish people. Please enjoy this episode. Hey, Harper, thanks so much for coming on People Do Want to Know podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here today.
Yeah, you're our first guest nominee, so this is very exciting. And yeah, I can't wait to hear about your story and share it with the listeners. Tell us about yourself. What do you do and how did you get there?
Loaded question. Lots of answers to give you. So first, thanks to Margot for recommending me for the podcast because that's how I'm here. I appreciate her so much. So who am I? I wear a lot of different hats. I'm a business coach, a podcaster, a storyteller, and a community builder. I spent 10 years working for other people in the communication field, in PR, marketing, social media, really jumping around 8 different jobs in 10 years. And in 2012, I was running the digital department at a beauty PR firm. And I'd walk 2 blocks in Manhattan where I grew up and where I've lived for most of my life. And all of a sudden I'd get 2 blocks and feel like I was going to collapse. I felt completely winded and out of breath. And I ended up, living in a 2nd floor apartment. I'd walk up the 2 flights of stairs and collapse on my couch. And clearly something wasn't right. And so I ended up discovering that I had a cyst the size of a golf ball in my right lung. And I had surgery to remove it March 5th, 2012, which is just about 12 years ago. And everything about my life is before and after surgery. I really didn't take care of my health prior to that. I've been living with a rare immune deficiency since I was 10 years old. I was actually diagnosed at 10, but living with it since birth. And I was 27 at the time of this surgery. So much of my life has now been dictated by that health experience and having the surgery back in 2012 and then having this lung condition ever since. And it was this period of time where I realized I needed to start prioritizing my health and my well-being and boundaries and making sure that I was doing what was best for me, not just working high-stress jobs and making sure everyone else was happy around me. So that's when I realized that the career change needed to happen. And I ended up going to a company where I did event production, marketing for nonprofits and health and wellness brands. And I knew that that would be my last job before I started a business without having any plan in place any timeline or any idea what the business was. I just had so much freedom and flexibility at this job that allowed me to work from home, go to doctor's appointments, go to the acupuncture, and take care of myself while also working there. So while working there, I met a lot of people in the personal development space, and that's how I got into coaching. And I ended up enrolling in a coaching training program in 2014. And I launched my coaching practice in November 2014. So I'm going on just about 10 years. And I work with people who are solopreneurs, small business owners, and freelancers to launch, build, and grow their businesses. So that's one side of my business. And then a whole other side of my business is that I have a podcast that I launched back in 2018 when I couldn't find content online related to invisible illness. What I live with is a super rare disease called hyper IgE syndrome. There's less than 300 of us in the world with this condition. And I would look online and I wasn't finding articles, let alone podcasts, about people like me who had these full, vibrant, thriving lives and also managed life with a rare disease. And so I created content that I wish existed for me. So I interviewed patients, caregivers, doctors, healers, people who started businesses because of family members with invisible illnesses. To date, I've released over 125 episodes, and it's been an incredible journey. I'm taking a hiatus right now, but a lot of the work that I'm focusing on right now is working with companies to share their stories of people living with invisible illnesses in the workplace. So I've worked with companies such as UBS, Diageo, Mellon Investments, and Sony Music to bring my talk and share my story about living with a rare disease to these companies and encouraging employees to share their stories as well. So that's sort of a, short but long version of who I am and what I've been working on these days.
Wow. I can confidently say that I've never met anyone who works in what you do. This is fascinating. And I have a ton of questions. I guess first a thought for me, in some way, when you realize that you have an illness, whether it be invisible or visible, you lose a little bit of agency that you have in how you live your life. But at the same time, it forces you to propel your life and your career in a way that's very unexpected. And it's almost like a blessing and a curse, as tough as it is to say. I mean, did you picture yourself as an entrepreneur before you realized that it was unmanageable for you to continue to work some traditional job?
It's interesting you say it that way because I really always knew I wanted to be my own boss. Straight out of college, I was like, I don't want to work for other people. I want to do my own thing. I want the freedom and flexibility of doing my own thing. I think that my health being challenged definitely played a huge role in realizing, wow, how amazing would it be to work for myself, go to a yoga class in the middle of the day. If I don't feel well, I cancel client calls or I choose to dictate my schedule, as opposed to I'm going to call out sick and my boss is constantly going to say, what's going on with her? We can't keep up with this situation. So I feel incredibly lucky to be in the situation that I am, to do my own thing on my own terms. I won't take calls before noon because I don't sleep well. So if I need to sleep late, it gives me some flexibility. My hair's still a little wet. It's 12:45. So, it's one of those things where I like having the mornings to myself and I'm able to dictate what my schedule looks like, which is really helpful. I think that there are jobs out there that I could do. And I think in this new world we live in with hybrid and work from home, there is the ability to work for, a company, a 9-to-5 job or a 40-hour-a-week job and still have the flexibility. I know there are a lot of people in the invisible illness and chronic illness space who are really grateful to what COVID created on that front.
That's a really good point about working from home and having that additional flexibility. I mean, it's tough even for people generally, having that agency and autonomy over your schedule, and now seeing big corporations impose a strict return to office. For example, I work at Amazon and we have a required 3-day return to office where they check how many times my badge has been swiped to make sure that I'm coming in
Wow.
3 days a week. Yeah. And Amazon released a statement that said explicitly, if you are up for promotion and you have not been coming in a certain amount of times 3 days a week for a certain amount of weeks in a row, your promotion might not go through.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I feel horrible. Everybody knows. I don't keep it a secret.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to pick your brain more about this concept of invisible illness. How does it impact people in the workplace, especially people working in traditional corporate jobs? It's something I personally am not familiar with, and I want to use this time to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's really interesting about it is when I was working at this company where I started a new department at a beauty PR firm, my boss was basically bringing me in knowing that I had an expertise that she and no one else at the company had at the time. And I came in and sort of walked in and said, 4 months into working there, hey, I need to go on medical leave and I'm going to be out of work for a few months. And visibly, nothing was wrong with me. She could not see anything different from me compared to a perfectly healthy person sitting next to me with or without an invisible illness. And so I think that's one of the challenges, or the major challenges that I personally have experienced and that I hear so often in working with people in companies and also, of course, people who are on the podcast, in figuring out how to advocate for themselves, when to share, how to share, and what's important for their colleagues and their managers to know about and how it impacts their day-to-day lives. So I had someone on the podcast early on that had narcolepsy, and we talked about what that experience was like of if she told her bosses that this was something that she lived with, because she may need a nap in the middle of the day. And the place that she worked at that time was a co-working space where she had that freedom and flexibility to just go into a conference room or a nap room and get her 10 minutes. But prior jobs didn't really allow for that. So I think a huge part of this is about advocating for yourself and knowing how to use your voice. I think I've gotten really good about that in general. Obviously it's different running a business and working for someone, but I think it's having confidence and knowing what is important for people to know in order for them to work with you and understand you without feeling any level of judgment, shame, or less than, if you know that you are capable of doing the job. Like I said, there were times when I went to acupuncture in the middle of the day or had doctor's appointments in the middle of the day, but ultimately none of that affects my productivity. I'm a great worker. I have a strong work ethic. And I think that's one of those things where you have to decide, as the person with an invisible illness, what you're willing to share, how you share it. And I think on the employer front, it's really important to have people who are opening up the door to allow you to share and be vulnerable and be honest and not feel judged. I've talked to some companies, DEI teams, where they've told me that 3 of their C-level employees have invisible illnesses but aren't disclosing it, and how they know that there are people on each of those people's teams who would really benefit from hearing that their managers are living with what they're living with to be able to be forthcoming about it. And I think there's a real challenge on that front of where's the line of personal life and career? What should I share? Why do people need to know this? And how do I protect myself?
Yeah, I think post-COVID, we're just having a complete reevaluation. I saw something on the news the other day that was Bernie Sanders is trying to push a 4-day work week bill that would essentially bring a 4-day work week to corporations and make it permissible. And his whole argument hinges on the fact that employees today are so much more productive than they were years ago, and yet they're expected to work the same amount of time. Why not reduce the amount of time if productivity is so great? And I agree with you when you talk about, getting the care you need in the middle of the day. You're productive and successful because you do those things to take care of yourself, not despite them.
Absolutely true. And I'm glad you say it that way. And I think that's what a lot of companies are learning in this. I don't like the term post-COVID world, but you know, in the last 4 years, what we have learned. And I think that people have also learned about the topic of like people being immunocompromised. So pre-COVID, I think that people would go into the office with a cold and not think anything of it. And now that's really not cool. And I think that there's something really valuable, especially for those of us who are immunocompromised, to not have to think about it as much anymore, because hopefully people are being smarter and working from home and choosing to protect their colleagues. I had a client probably 4 or 5 years ago who came into my office like snotty and sneezing and coughing. And I had a very close relationship with her. And I said, what are you doing here? Like, why are you here right now? Why are we not on Zoom right now? And I've talked to her about it a million times since, because it like drove me nuts that she thought that was okay. She knew my health situation. And I think it would never happen today in 2024. But I think it's such a reminder of what COVID did do for us in being a bit more mindful of who's around you and not knowing what people are going through. And to your point, asking about invisible illness, you just have no idea what people are living with. And if it's invisible, it's up to them to disclose and for people to be compassionate, because you have no idea what's happening behind closed doors.
Absolutely. And I guess last thing I'll add on the whole corporate tech world. So you talked about taking leave or taking a leave of absence and working in tech. So when you think about like Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, Fang, all the major companies, Amazon, essentially, I can't prove this, but there are a lot of anecdotal stories on apps like Fishbowl and Blind. People who take FMLA come back to a performance improvement plan immediately. And at that point, the company is like, we're going to find a way to usher you out. I seldom see situations where people take FMLA and there's not a consequence for them that's negative. So it's really a shame, and we have a long way to go. If we're offering FMLA, we need to be sincere in our interest to offer FMLA for employees.
I couldn't agree more.
It's really disheartening because people who go on FMLA essentially are prepared to leave the company because they understand that the reality is they probably cannot take FMLA without repercussions.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's really crazy. I mean, I think there's a lot of room for improvement within companies. And obviously we could get into a whole conversation on the health insurance front and all of that and how it's tied to employers in this country. And it's such a horrible thing in that sense, in my opinion, especially as an entrepreneur. And I think it's just, there's a lot of room for companies to be more supportive and inclusive around people living with chronic illnesses, disabilities, invisible illnesses, and creating a space where people feel welcome. I gave a talk about a month and a half ago at a company, and there were 150 people on Zoom, and I had no idea how engaged people would be. But my talk that I give, half of it is me sharing my story and half of it is a workshop. And I would give prompts in the workshop encouraging people to share their story. The chat was moving so fast that I couldn't even read, but it was people disclosing what they were living with. And when I spoke to the client afterwards about the experience, she was absolutely stunned by the level of engagement and how, quote unquote, desperate people were to share. And it says so much about the world that we're living in right now, of people wanting to feel and be seen more. And they want their voices heard, and they want to be represented at the, in the workplace and beyond. And I just found it so fascinating to see people sort of raising their hands going, please, please let me share my story in the workplace, where not long ago, it was sort of forbidden to share things like that. And there needed to be a boundary between personal and work.
Yeah. On that note, I want to ask you a completely different question, switching gears here. Up until recently, you had been living in Israel, and you were even there on October 7th. What was that experience like, and how do you feel now that you're back in New York City?
Oh, talk about loaded questions. So I was in New York for all of August and September. And while I was in New York, I decided that I was going to move back to New York in spring 2024. I had been living in Tel Aviv since November 2021. Prior to that, I had visited 13 times over 10 years, fell madly in love with Tel Aviv. And so on October 1st, I flew to Tel Aviv. I arrived on the 2nd. I went to dinner with a friend on the 2nd, and I had never gone out to dinner after landing. I'd always had such a strict rule of leave the airport, go home, shower, unpack, sleep, take care of myself. Again, this goes back to boundaries. But my friend begged me to go out to dinner because I hadn't seen her in 2 months. So I went out to dinner on the 2nd, and I woke up on the 3rd with a cold. I had seen my nephew 2 days prior in New York before I left, and he gave me whatever illness he had. So the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, after 2 months of not being in Tel Aviv, I didn't leave the house. I saw none of my friends and was sick. And then I woke up on October 7th to a text message from my next door neighbor saying, I think I hear the Iron Dome. I'll be honest, I didn't really think so much of it. It was 7 o'clock in the morning. I was groggy. I said, okay, my bedroom's a bomb shelter. I'm just going to stay in my room and see what happens. And then obviously things progressed and everyone was checking in on each other and the news started coming out. And a friend of mine came over at around 11 a.m. And I said, I'm staying in bed. I'm staying in this room. I'm just got a bit too nervous. And she came over, and that was, 5.5 months ago. And her family ended up joining us there. Her brother and his girlfriend, her mom, her ex-husband, and her 3-year-old daughter all moved into my apartment on October 7th and were there for a month. And then her ex-husband and her daughter lived in my apartment until my lease was up on February 7th. And on October 7th, I tried to get a flight out of Tel Aviv. My gut feeling was, I don't want to be here right now. This feels scary. I want to be out of here for 2 weeks. I have very close friends and family in London. I packed a bag for 2 weeks and said, all right, I'll be back soon. I attempted to leave my apartment on October 7th. I got downstairs and a siren went off. And I ran back upstairs and said, I don't think this is the time to fly. Getting to the airport felt scary. And ultimately, it was good that I didn't do that because flights were not going out on any airline except for El Al, and I hadn't booked an El Al flight. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, I saw that a friend of mine posted on Instagram that she got a flight to Miami on El Al, and I ended up going online and seeing where I could get a flight anywhere in Europe. I was just too antsy to be there at that moment. And so I ended up booking a flight for Monday, October 9th to fly to London with El Al. And so I was in Tel Aviv exactly 7 days to the minute. I arrived at 5:30 p.m. on a Monday, and I left at 5:30 p.m. on the following Monday. And I went to London, and I stayed with a very close friend. And after about 48 hours, I realized there's just no way this is going to end anytime soon. And as much as I was still jet lagged from flying from New York, I decided to fly to New York. And so I came to New York, and I've been here ever since. It's been some of the craziest months of my life. I mean, I knew that a transition was coming soon, knowing that I had already decided that I wanted to move back to New York, but I did not anticipate moving so abruptly and leaving my apartment and my life behind with no order or closure or structure in any way, and instead leaving with a level of trauma and sadness and fear. I mean, as I said, I've lived in New York. I've lived in Manhattan my entire life, aside from my 2 years in Tel Aviv and 2.5 years in Boston for college. And I've never felt so uncomfortable as a Jew in New York City. And I hate saying those words, but it's true. I get on the subway, and when I'm sitting on the subway, I feel like I'm watching a tennis match. I'm so aware of my surroundings and just sort of looking around to see who's around me. My volume on my music or a podcast is low. I'm just so much more aware of my surroundings than I've ever been before. And I never thought that would be the case in New York City.
Do you think you're aware because of the anti-Semitism in New York, or you're just aware because general safety in New York has gone down? Because the subway is not a pleasant place to be these days.
Yeah, I think the subway's not a pleasant place to be in general, but it's the best mode of transportation from a speed perspective. I think it's all about anti-Semitism. I'm not, I'm in therapy and I'm not having therapy conversations saying I'm afraid someone's going to kill me. I just have a less trust in people. And I feel, am I sitting next to somebody that just hates Jews or wants Israel to be off the map? Because I know that these people exist in this city. And, it's a very weird feeling to live somewhere that you've spent your entire life and feel this way. I mean, I was sitting on the couch one day in my childhood apartment back in January, and I heard this sound outside the window, and I looked out, and there was a protest. And this is not a main street. This is not, I'm not so far from the UN, but I'm not that close. And they were, protesting to the UN, and it was over 1,000 people. And I just was like shaking for hours. I couldn't even believe that this was happening. And to hear people shouting from the river to the sea, from my childhood home, was absolutely horrifying. And it's one of those things where I've seen plenty of videos, I've read plenty of articles. I know this is happening in the world, and I know this is happening in New York, but to witness it firsthand was really, really jarring and upsetting.
Yeah, that's incredibly upsetting. I've heard so many stories at this point of people and where they were on October 7th and the experiences they've had. And for some reason, like, we're 5 months in, and it never gets any easier for me to hear, what you and others have been going through. It always really upsets me. And it's horrible what's happening in New York, I think. And you were in London too, and the protests that happened in London were some of the biggest and the scariest and the most anti-Semitic by far. So yeah, I remember when I went to the rallies in New York at the beginning of all of this, maybe like late October, early November, I posted on my Instagram story to my Jewish friends, and I said, you need to be prepared that you're going to be grossly outnumbered. It was sad how few Jewish people, or maybe people that supported Israel, were showing up to these rallies when compared to the pro-Palestinian side. I mean, there were 4 times as many of them, almost at any rally that I attended.
I just had to take such a deep breath listening to you say that, because it's so upsetting to hear. Not that I'm not aware of it, but just the reminder. One of the magical things about living in Tel Aviv and living in Israel is that it's embedded in the society. You're not necessarily talking about being Jewish all day, but you're amongst your people. You're amongst Jews who get it and have been through this experience with you, and you have similarities. I mean, I remember years ago, my mom saying, like, I don't, quote unquote, require you to marry or be with someone Jewish, but I'll tell you that it's a lot easier if you did. And I remember how much that stood out to me. And now I can't even imagine not being with someone Jewish for all of those reasons, and the connection that you have and the commonality around the culture of being a Jewish person. Because I've always identified as a cultural Jew. It's not about the prayers. There's a lot of history that I can't tell you about because that is not my expertise. But when it comes to food and family and community, that's what it means to be Jewish to me at this point. I never thought of myself as someone who would wear a Hamsa or a Star of David or anything. And now I'm wearing this necklace that is from the Nova Music Festival that says, "We will dance again." And I know a lot of people are walking around with the dog tags for Bring Them Home, which obviously I would do as well. But this, to me, as a diehard music fan and music festival fan, is really, really close to my heart. I was actually supposed to be at a music festival in the Negev in Israel on October 12th. So the timing is really like, I can't believe what happened. And then to find out, that we were supposed to have been right there several days later, and it could have been us.
Yeah. So I want to ask you more about that. You single-handedly raised over $40,000 for Israel. How'd you decide to do it? And are you currently working on any other projects for Israel right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am an action-oriented person. When I was in high school, 9/11 happened, and my mom was running a holistic healthcare center. And we immediately went into action and started, providing relief to police officers and first responders. So it's in my DNA to jump into action. I started a community service club in high school, and it's really, really important to me. On October 9th, when I flew to London, I saw a friend of mine post her Venmo on Instagram saying, donate to me. I will get the money where it's needed in Israel. And I said, I'm going to steal this idea and do the same thing. So when I landed in London on the 9th, my friend connected me to her brother-in-law and said, he knows where money needs to go. You guys should connect. And so from that day forward, me and Shai were in touch numerous times a day for several months. And basically I would post on my Instagram saying, these 20 soldiers in this unit need new boots. Please send money, Venmo, PayPal, however you can send me money, I will get them the money so that these boots can be purchased. I had a woman who was translating for me while I was living in Tel Aviv and doing some admin work for me. She sent me a message that her husband's unit didn't have enough tents. There were 14 people and only 8 tents. Can you help me get $1,000? So I spent the first 3 months of the war just actively raising money through social media, through my network, and getting people to send, as you said, for over $40,000. In November, I got connected. My aunt connected me to her friend's niece who was also doing amazing work in Long Island. And she was sending stuff from New York to Tel Aviv and getting it to soldiers in Gaza. So she and I started connecting. We ended up doing a Hanukkah drive where we collected toys, over 500 of them, to send to families who had been displaced and their children. And she and I worked together, Stephanie and I, really closely, sending stuff to soldiers, displaced families, etc., and sending probably 2 to 3 passengers a week who were flying to Israel on their own, mostly to volunteer, who were offering to be passengers and, take whatever stuff we needed them to take. And so this became a full-time job. I was fully consumed doing this up until about 2 weeks ago when I said I need to take a little bit of a break, find an apartment, get a little more settled in New York, because I'm physically in New York, but I'm mentally still so much in Tel Aviv, and I needed to balance it out a little bit more. I'm working on that. But to me, it felt really important to make an impact and help as much as I possibly could from here and utilize my network. One of my biggest things about all of this is there's so many incredible nonprofits and organizations around the world and in Israel that are collecting money. The challenge is that we often do not know exactly where the money is going and how it's being utilized. So my goal in doing what I was doing was being able to demonstrate, here is exactly what we need. We need $1,250.20 for these boots to be purchased. Here's a video of the people it's going to. Here's a thank you from the soldiers. And it was the storytelling that people were attached to be able to go, this is where I need to send money and I need to continue supporting. And being transparent was so crucial. And I think that there needs to be more of that. I know so many people are donating to all these organizations, but you're not really seeing where the money is directly going and how that correlates. So you asked me if there's anything I'm working on now. A very close Israeli friend of mine, actually my first Israeli friend after Birthright, so I've known her for many years, Maya, she connected me to this incredible organization called Merchav Marpeh, which translates to healing space. And the concept is that twice a week, they are offering for people in 4 different categories: survivors of the Nova Music Festival, first responders, soldiers, and bereaved families from October 7th to come and have treatment. There are 120 therapists who are there to do any type of treatment from talk therapy, art therapy, music therapy, acupuncture, really any sort of support these people can utilize in order to prevent PTSD. And so many of these people, including soldiers and especially the first responders, are coming in thinking, oh, this is going to be so woo-woo. It's not for me. They can't help me, and walk out absolutely transformed. And so the work that they're doing has been absolutely incredible. And while I was feeling a bit burnt out by sending stuff and dealing with all the flights and all the coordination and being up in the middle of the night, checking flight times and all of that, I said, how can I utilize my time wisely and still give back? And so I am going to start fundraising for these people to be able to get these treatments in order for this to continue running as long as it's necessary. The IDF provides a level of support, but nothing like this. And so by the time this episode airs, I hope to have a landing page or something up. People can check out my Instagram account, Harper_Spero, Spero, which is where I'm the most actively talking about this subject and sharing all the information about fundraising and the work that I'm doing for Israel. So definitely give that a follow and check it out if you want to know exactly where your money is going. My goal when I spoke to them initially was, I will not get involved unless you're able to say to me, here's what it will cost for an individual person. Here's what it would cost for a unit to get treatment for a day. I want something super, super transparent and clear to be able to say, sponsor a person, sponsor a unit, sponsor a family, and people feel like they're doing good.
That is so cool. I had no idea you were doing this work. This is really amazing. It's very important also because it ensures that you don't get desensitized to the issue and the potential impact your donation can give. And that's what's important, because after months and months of this, knowing exactly where that money is going is very important for feeling connected and compelled to continue to give.
Well, and I also definitely witnessed by the end of December, especially, that there was major donor fatigue. And I was like being flooded with donations, and then it stopped being as, consistent. This war is not going to end anytime soon. The need for support is not going to end anytime soon. How do I keep people engaged? And I truly have a list on my phone of people who have said to me flat out, when you start up with something new, please keep me posted. We are here to donate. And so those are the people that I will immediately reach out to and say, this is what I'm working on. We need your support. This is what this money is going towards. And there are people that are still willing to give, but I think more than ever, to your point, they want to know where that's going so that they will continue to give and know what value they're providing.
Yeah, 100%. So this is a really amazing initiative, and I hope you're able to raise a ton of money. And I can't wait to see once your landing page goes live so I can check it out and also share it with everyone who listens to this podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, before we wrap, I do want to ask you a couple of questions around professional development and career development, because you have coached so many different people. You have coached chefs, health coaches, podcasters, producers. I think you have a very unique lens to offer this audience around finding your purpose within the workspace, knowing how to carry yourself, knowing how to sell yourself and tell your story, whether it's about invisible illness or just who you are and your accomplishments. Can you offer one piece of advice to these listeners around a lesson on professional development, career growth, and how to succeed?
I'd say that it's twofold. One is be yourself and don't be afraid to try anything. Like, I'm such a big fan of throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. I think so many people get really caught up in creating a really comprehensive plan, and this is exactly how it's going to go, and here's my 6 months, and here's my 5 years. And personally, anytime I've done something like that, it never works out. And so I'm a big fan of goal setting, but manageable goal setting. And I think that it's really important to just sort of put things out there. Create a landing page, build something out that's manageable but flexible for change, and see who's interested, whether it's a service, whether it's a product. Just start putting feelers out there, because I think too many people put too much energy, most of the time, not always, in like the planning stage that they don't have any room for error. And when things go wrong, it feels like a massive mistake instead of a learning. And so to me, when I think back to younger years, I wasn't my authentic self because I was working for other people and doing things their way. I realized when I am the best version of myself, and to your point, going to acupuncture and taking care of my health in the middle of the day made me a better employee, makes me a better entrepreneur. Those are the kind of things that I need to stay true to. And I think it's a reminder to anyone with or without an invisible illness to advocate for yourself and stand up for yourself and do what is best for you. If something doesn't feel right, don't stick with it. If this is not the right boss, this is not the right company, make a move. Like there's always opportunities out there and it may feel scary, but as someone who had 8 jobs in 10 years and have been running a business for 10 years, so much has changed, so much is different. And honestly, to tie into, this topic of this podcast, October 7th is such proof that you have no idea what tomorrow will bring. So do the things that you love doing and embrace like who you are and your values.
Snaps to that. I mean, I couldn't resonate with this more. Whenever I did job interviews, people would always ask me like, what do you see for yourself in 5 years? Or how do you view this role as a stepping stone into your larger career goals? And of course I have an answer prepared, but if you like ask me as my friend, I'll be like, I don't know. I just think it's a good job. I'm just trying to get by. You know what I mean? So in some ways, I think I'm a huge planner. And in other ways, I leave a lot of room to be pleasantly surprised by life. I don't always know every detail. And you know what? It feels validating to hear that from you, that's okay.
You do you. I mean, listen, I think I've certainly had clients and friends who are major planners and, I'm very organized and structured to a certain degree. But you could say that my competitors or other people in my space would insist that clients come up with a 6-month plan, a 1-year plan, a 5-year plan. And to me, I personally haven't benefited from doing that. And so why would I teach that to my clients?
Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel seen and heard. And
If that's what you got out of this, I am thrilled.
Thanks. It's been awesome to have you on. What's the best way to keep up with your projects and learn more about your work on social media?
Absolutely. So my website is harperspero.com, HARPERSPERO.com. My podcast, which again is on hiatus at the moment, is Made Visible. You can find it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and wherever else you listen to podcasts. I'm actually a fan of Overcast if anyone needs a recommendation of somewhere to listen. And then my Instagram is where I'm most active personally, professionally, Israel advocacy, which is Harper_Spero, SPERO. And then I'm also trying to be a bit more active on LinkedIn, which is also my name, around all things invisible illness, especially in the corporate workplace and the different initiatives that I'm doing. You can sign up for my newsletter on my website if you work in a company where you'd be interested in bringing me in to speak or do anything related to invisible illness and storytelling. You can sign up for my newsletter and or contact me there, and I'd love to connect further.
Awesome. Well, last question for you. It's one that I ask every guest that I have on the podcast. Who would you like to nominate for People You Want to Know?
So I knew this question was coming, and I've been debating. I have so many incredible Jewish people that I'd love to recommend, but the person that came to mind at first for me is Ashley Feinstein-Gersley, who is known as the Fiscal Femme. She is a money coach. She's written 2 books about money. She's an incredible woman, dear friend, former client, and I think that she'd be an incredible guest on the show to talk about all things money. She has a chapter in her book around being Jewish, around money. So I think that could be a really interesting topic to address. And I think that your listeners would really enjoy hearing from her.
Wow, that's a great nomination. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Margarita. I enjoyed this conversation so much.
Yeah, okay. We'll talk soon.
Bye.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Be the first to hear our episodes by subscribing to People You Want to Know wherever you get your podcasts. And for exclusive content, follow us on Instagram at People You Want to Know.